Early here, but I'm going to start anyway because this is quite a hectic session. My name is Matt, and this is 20-ish Power BI tips in 20 minutes. I'm going to go through as many tips, tricks, productivity hacks within Power BI as I possibly can within 20 minutes. As I said, it's going to be quite a hectic session, quite fast-paced. What I have done is saved all of these tips and tricks on my GitHub, which you can find via my website. Please do leave feedback. It's really important for myself and the organisers, so I really do appreciate that. Probably won't have time for any questions because it is such a full session. If you're wondering, yes, that is Shakira on my T-shirt. If you have any other questions, I will be happy to stay around at the end and answer those. Without further ado, I'm going to jump straight into it. Okay, tip number one, nice and easy. Do you ever find that you're going through Power Query, through a query, and you just can't find that column that you need? There's a simple solution for that. Control G, and you get a go-to column pop up. You can then search for your column within that list, or you can actually just search for it in the search bar, and a quick double click will take you to that column. It's pretty cool, right? If you want another way of looking at your columns in a query, you can just select a whole row, and then what you do get is this nice column format row of data, so you can see all your data side by side. What else can we do with columns? Well, something that we often want to do with columns is actually remove them. There's obviously a few different ways to do that. So commonly what you might do is you select a couple of columns and you select remove other columns. And that brings up a nice little table.select column syntax. If you were just removing columns instead, then we get a table.remove column syntax. It's slightly different syntax in the M code. Why is that important? Well, the two different functions create two different dependencies on your source data. The select columns will create a dependency on the columns that you're actually selecting, whereas the remove columns is creating a dependency on columns you're removing. So you might want to think about that when using the two different types of functions when selecting columns. More fun with columns. You might see here that in this table, I've got a few different columns that are named not so nicely. We've got some capital letters, we've got some underscores, and usually probably what you'd do is you'd go through and type, all right, flight number, etc. But that would take forever. So instead, what we can do is use a table, a column name transformer function. And that looks something a little bit like this. Again, I'll put all of this in the GitHub. This is a function which is going to iterate through all of our columns. And if there's an underscore, it's going to remove it and leave a space instead. If it's a capital letter where it shouldn't be because it's not the first letter of the word, it's going to make it lowercase. And if it's an ID column, then it will just leave it as uppercase. So a simple example of how you might want to transform your column names. So then when we go from something like this, where we've got our not so nicely named columns, we can quickly jump with one line of code to a table where every single column name has been transformed based on that logic that we've put on in the function. And as you can see in the code, that is just a simple one line referencing our column name transformer function. So really cool. Did you also know that you can filter columns in Power Query by clicking on a cell? For example, if I just want to look at American Airlines here, I could right-click on that cell, text filters equals, and it should quickly filter that column. No need to search in the drop-down or anything like that. What else can we do? Well, quite often we want to work with quite a light data set in Power BI, so you might want to reduce the amount of rows in a query. One quick way to do that is use our keep range of rows function. We can select that, and then we can specify how many rows we want to keep from the first amount of rows. So let's say, for example, we just want to keep 500 rows. We can quickly do that if it wants to load that. If we want to parameterize this, we can do that very easily. For example, I have created a parameter here called row filter. And here I could then specify, okay, I just want 300 rows at the moment, but when I publish it up to the service, I actually want more than that. And it's taking a while to load, so give it a second. There we go. So what you can then do is, if we just quickly add that back in, let's say we had 5,000 rows. We can then go into our M code. Instead of specifying 5,000, we can just change that to our row filter parameter, and then it will filter that table based on what we've specified in that parameter. Nice and easy. As I said, this is really useful for when you're publishing up to the service, because if I then go into my data set that I published to the service, go into the settings, go into the parameters. The Wi-Fi does not like me today. What you should then find is a list of all your parameters. You can then change your parameter value, and then when it refreshes, it will then update based on that. So you're using a nice light data set in desktop and your full data set in service. You can then take this a step further and use it in deployment pipelines, if it wants to work. Okay. So when you've got your deployment pipeline, you can then specify in your deployment parameters actually what those values are. So automatically, when you use your deployment pipeline from dev to test, for example, you can then specify what you want that row filter to be. Okay, I'm going to move on because this Wi-Fi is not helping me. What can we do next? Let's go back to Power Query. Did you know that there's a quick access toolbar in Power Query? So in the top left here, you can't really see it, but there is actually a toolbar. So if I've got something like Advanced Editor, which I use quite often, I can then add that to the quick access toolbar. I can do things like data source settings, and they appear in the top left there. You don't need to go searching for all the different ribbons. We can also zoom in and out, which is quite difficult without a mouse. With a mouse. But if I do Control-Shift plus minus, we can zoom in and out of our Advanced Editor code, which is quite nice. We can also, if we've got a string here that we need to add quotation marks, rather than trying to find the start and the end of the string that you want to use, we can just do a shift quotation mark, and it will automatically add them to the start and the end of the text you've highlighted. And this will also work for curly brackets and also normal brackets. There we go. We can also comment lines in and out quite easily with shortcuts. All you need to do is Control/, and the same again to uncomment. Similarly, if you want to comment out a whole block of code, we can do Alt-Shift-A, and it'll automatically comment out that code using the block comment syntax. Some nice little shortcuts for you there. Date tables. Everyone loves date tables, right? My new favorite way to create date tables is to use Bravo, which is a really great external tool built by the SQL BI guys. Thank you so much to them for this. So if I attach to my desktop file here, what Bravo does is it has loads of functionality in terms of checking your data set in terms of best practices, etc. But one thing you can do is use a manage dates area, which sets up date tables for you. It allows you to specify whether you want to include holidays, certain intervals, or formats. And you can also use this really cool time intelligence function, which will automatically create time intelligence measures for you. So let's say, for example, in my data set, I have got an airline average delay time, and I want to be able to see this by previous month, previous year, previous quarter, whatever. If I select that in here, what I then should get is a couple of date tables that's set up for me. And then it's automatically created a time intelligence folder within my measures table. And if I start having a look at these, you'll see we have things like previous quarter, previous year, quarter on quarter, all these different measures that you might not know how to build from the off, but it automatically creates those for you. If I then apply that, it will then automatically add those to my model. Data dictionaries. I hate writing data dictionaries. I don't know about anyone else. I find it really tedious and manual. So there's a couple of ways you can automate that. For example, in the new DAX query view, you can run things like evaluate.info.measures, and that will bring back a nice metadata table for you that has all your DAX measures in, format strings, etc. You can also do this with tables and columns. There's loads of different parts to this function that you can use. You can then copy that and export it out. Or if you're lazy like me, you can use something like DAX Studio. If you look at the DMVs within DAX Studio, you can pretty much get to the same result. If I select here and run this, it then brings back my measures for me. The main benefit of DAX Studio is you can actually change what your output target is. So for example, if you want this to output straight to an Excel file, you can do that directly. Okay, more external tools, because I love them. I spend as little time as Power BI Desktop as I can. Tabular Editor. Who doesn't love Tabular Editor, right? One of my favorite things to do in here is use their advanced scripting. So let's say, for example, we've got a table like this with our flights data, and there's various different columns in here that I want to create measures for. Just all I want to do is sum the measures. Now I could go and create these measures one by one, or what I can do is take a script snippet from the Tabular Editor website, such as this one, and this is going to automatically, if I put it into my C# script, once I select all the measures, all the sort of columns, that I want, it's going to create a measure for each of these columns, doing a sum for each of the columns, and then it's going to hide those columns for me. So it's a common best practice that you should hide any columns that should be summarized. So if I run that, we get 7 different measures, I think that is, or 6, just with a click of a button, and it's also hidden those columns for me. There's loads and loads more really cool script snippets on their website that you should definitely check out to automate some of these manual processes. There's also the best practice analyzer in Tabular Editor, which basically looks at your data set and tells you what you are doing, which you shouldn't be, based on some best practice rules that you have implemented. Now, you can use Microsoft's best practice rules, you can use your own, but the ability in here is you can either ignore the rule. For example, here, this is saying I've got some unnecessary columns because I'm not using them. I could ignore that. I could generate the fix script and see what it actually looks like, what it's going to do, or I can just apply the fix, and it will send that straight to my model. Okay, enough external tools. I'll reluctantly go back to desktop. Let's say we want to do some table formatting, right? Well, straight away, you probably can't read that very well. One of my favorite new features is the global font size within grids. If you increase that, it will automatically increase the font size for everything that's in the grid. No need to do row headers, then column headers, and then values. You can do it all at once. Sometimes I find it really difficult to resize my columns. I can't find this little resizing symbol here. So what you can do instead is just select a column, hold Shift, and you can actually just left and right on your arrow keys to a pixel level. You can decide how wide your column wants to be, which is really useful when you've got one of those big columns and you don't want to mess up all the formatting. We can also do some conditional formatting. A common way to do that might be with something like this, where you have a measure where you're saying, okay, if my average delay time for this year is greater than last year, then do this. If it's lower, then do this. And then you add that into conditional formatting. You add some icons. It's all great, groovy. What if you want to use some custom icons, but you don't want to actually upload any into Power BI Desktop? You could use something like unichar. So unichar is a function within DAX, and it basically uses all the different Unicodes that you can find online. I'll quickly show you a website that I use. So it's nicely called The Huge List of Unicode Symbols. And that's essentially what it is. So there's all sorts in here. You can even get Braille in here. I don't know why that would be useful for Power BI, but there you go. I'm going to show you an example where I've used 2 emojis within this table. So if I just add that measure in, we should now get a happy face for when our delays are less than last year, and an angry face if it's worse. That's just one simple example. Let's do some more shortcuts, because they're always fun. If you're selecting around your visuals and you can't quite find that white space to click off of it, you can just hit Enter. Similarly, you can hit Space. If you want to group visuals together, all you have to do is hold Control, select the visuals you want, and press Control-G, and it will automatically group the visuals together. If you want to take a screenshot with a tooltip in place, but you keep moving the mouse and it just won't go away, you can actually lock tooltips in place by hovering over and then doing a Control-Shift F10. And if I move my mouse away, that tooltip's going to stay in place nicely for us. In your data tab over here, we've got lots of different tables. Sometimes some of these are expanded and I just can't find the table that I want. You can use a shortcut of Alt-Shift-9 to expand them all. And similarly, Alt-Shift-1 will collapse them all. And you can flick between them using that quite nicely. I've shown, there's actually one more shortcut to show you. Let's say we've got a measure where we have lots of similar words within the measure. Let me do that again. In this measure, for example, we want to replace the AVG with average because the measure we're querying is actually called that. If we want to replace all of these rather than doing it one by one, all we do is Control-Shift-L. It's then going to select all of the common words within our measure, and then you can type out the correct word, and it fixes all of them for you. I've shown off quite a lot of keyboard shortcuts in this demo. I'm not a gatekeeper. If you do Control ? You get all of the, didn't do the right one, Shift ? Sorry. You get all of the different keyboard shortcuts that are available. These are just the most commonly used ones, but you can actually go to the article to find more. Cool, last couple of tips really, really quickly. If you've got a bar chart like this and you want to somehow make a bullet chart, but you don't want to use any custom visuals, you can actually use the analytics pane here. And if you create a target measure, so let's say here we've got a target for how long we want our delays to be, we can drag that into the upper and the lower bound on our analytics pane, hit enable, and just like that, we've got a target on our bar chart. So that's quite a nice little workaround. If we want to create a cool card, so at the moment, this is just the average delay time, which is obviously dynamic based on the filter. We want to add a little bit more pizzazz to this, a little bit more context. How we can do that? Well, first thing we could do is add a little bit of date context. So let's make this into a line chart, and let's add a date. And then let's get rid of our noisy stuff in the visual, get rid of the axis values and the titles. Oh, forgot one. And then what we can do is actually use dynamic titles to add a little bit more context to our visual. So if we go into title, you could just add a manual title if you want. But I've pre-created a couple of measures that we can actually add some context. So for example, average delays were 35 minutes in 2015. And again, this is still filterable by this. We could even take this a step further and add a subtitle. For example, if we want to know what period the peak amount of delays was in, we've got that. And just like that, we've taken a pretty boring card into something that's got a little bit more context using dynamic titles. OK, I've got one last tip, and I think that's pretty good timing, actually. This is one that I added in just last night. So there is a guy called Vahid, and he's created an extension to Microsoft Edge and Google Chrome, where you can preview a report in your workspace without clicking on it, which when you've got a workspace full of reports and you can't actually remember which one is which, could be really, really useful. I'll quickly show you what it looks like if the Wi-Fi lets me. So if I hover over this report, is it going to work? It gives you a nice preview of what that report actually looks like without having to click into it. So you can imagine if you had a workspace full of reports, I've got one here, I think, you can quickly just hover over without having to go into the report. This also uses RLS if you've got that enabled, and it does actually load, it does actually render the actual report. It's not just a static image. That is all of my tips in 20 minutes. I apologize it was so fast-paced, but hopefully you've at least learned one tip and can take that home with you. If you've got any feedback, I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. We've probably got time for any questions if anyone has any. Yep. Sorry? Repeat the last one. Yeah, OK. Yeah, so it's a extension in Microsoft Edge and Google Chrome. So it's just called Power BI Report Previewer. Yeah. As I said, all of this, I've made a PDF with all of these tips in. I'll include this one as well, so all the links you'll need will be in there as well.